Okay. Hello, good morning. No, I don't think this day is today. It still took like a weird long time for it to work, so. Hello. Let me say one thought and then I'll move on to the next thought. So, today is book 6 of Series of Unfortunate Events. We're getting to the halfway point, which is great. Unfortunately, I will not be able to stream for very long today because I have another 400 other things that just came up this morning. It was shorter today, this is true. It's getting better. It's improving. My ear's sticking out of my hair and I look like Zelda. Good morning, Shannon. How are you? So, because I unfortunately woke up this morning and had 6 new things come up in my life, because that's basically how my life works now, is I plan things and then more things happen. So I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be speeching too long before we just jump in here, because I want to get some progress done. My goal is to get at least 4 chapters done, but that may not happen, so we'll see. But my goal is to get at least 4 chapters done today, in about an hour or an hour and 15 minutes. Hello, Josh. Thank you, Tara. They're not necessarily bad things, it's just life things, so I got called into work early, but I'm behind on my chores, and I need to get my chores done before tomorrow, but I'm working a turnaround tonight, which means I'm getting off at 11 p.m., and I have to be back at work at 7 a.m., and so I'm going to have to rush home when I get off at 3, and boring stuff you probably don't care about, but these are my favorite series. This is my favorite series of books ever, Josh. The movie's good, the series is great, or the Netflix series is great, but the books are number 1, and I'm jumping into these. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. The Ersatz Elevator by Lemony Snicket. Oh, let me know if audio is weird or music's too loud or distracting. For Beatrice, when we met, my life began. Soon afterward, yours ended. Chapter 1. The book you are holding in your 2 hands right now, assuming that you are in fact holding this book and that you have only 2 hands, is one of 2 books in the world that will show you the difference between the word nervous and the word anxious. The other book, of course, is the dictionary. And if I were you, I would read that book instead. Like this book, the dictionary shows you that the word nervous means worried about something. You might feel nervous, for instance, if you were served prune ice cream for dessert because you would be worried that it would taste awful. Whereas the word anxious means troubled by disturbing suspense, which you might feel if you were served a live alligator for dessert because you would be troubled by the disturbing suspense about whether you would eat your dessert or it would eat you. But unlike this book, the dictionary also discusses words that are far more pleasant to contemplate. The word bubble is in the dictionary, for instance, as is the word peacock, the word vacation, and the words the, authors, execution, has, been, canceled, which make up a sentence that's always pleasant to hear. So if you were to read the dictionary rather than this book, you could skip the parts about nervous and anxious and read about things that wouldn't keep you up all night long, weeping and tearing out your hair. But this book is not the dictionary, and if you were to skip the parts about nervous and anxious in this book, you would be skipping the most pleasant sections in the entire story. Nowhere in this book will you find the words bubble, peacock, vacation, or, unfortunately for me, anything about an execution being canceled. Instead, I'm sorry to say, you will find the words grief, despair, and woeful, as well as the phrases dark passageway, Count Olaf in disguise, and the Baudelaire orphans were trapped, plus an assortment of miserable words and phrases that I cannot bring myself to write down. In short, reading a dictionary might make you feel nervous because you would worry about finding it very boring, But reading this book will make you feel anxious, because you will be troubled by the disturbing suspense in which the Baudelaire orphans find themselves, and if I were you, I would drop this book right now, out of your 2 or more hands, and curl up with a dictionary instead, because all the miserable words I must use to describe these unfortunate events are about to reach your eyes or ears. I imagine you must be nervous, Mr. Poe said. Mr. Poe was a banker who had been put in charge of the Baudelaire orphans following the death of their parents in a horrible fire. I'm sorry to say that Mr. Poe had not done a very good job so far, and that the Baudelaires had learned the only thing they could rely on with Mr. Poe was that he always had a cough. Sure enough, as soon as he finished his sentence, he took out his white handkerchief and coughed into it. The flash of white cotton was practically the only thing the Baudelaire orphans could see. Violet, Klaus, and Sonny were standing with Mr. Poe in front of an enormous apartment building on Dark Avenue, a street in one of the fanciest districts of the city. Although Dark Avenue was just a few blocks away from where the Baudelaire mansion had been, the 3 children had never been in this neighborhood before, and they had assumed that the Dark in Dark Avenue was simply a name and nothing more, the way a street named George Washington Boulevard does not necessarily indicate that George Washington lives there, or the way 6th Street has not been divided into 6 equal parts. But this afternoon, the Baudelaires realized that Dark Avenue was more than a name. It was an appropriate description. Rather than street lamps placed at regular intervals along the sidewalk were enormous trees, the likes of which the children had never seen before, and which they could scarcely see now. High above a thick and prickly trunk, the branches of the trees drooped down like laundry hung out to dry, spreading their wide, flat leaves out into every direction, like a low, leafy ceiling over the Baudelaire's heads. This ceiling blocked out all the light from above, so even though it was the middle of the afternoon, the street looked as dark as evening, if a bit greener. It was hardly a good way to make these 3 orphans feel welcome as they approached their new home. You have nothing to be nervous about, Mr. Poe said, putting his handkerchief back in his pocket. I realize some of your previous guardians have caused a little trouble, but I think Mr. and Mrs. Squalor will provide you with a proper home. We're not nervous, Violet said. We're too anxious to be nervous. Anxious and nervous mean the same thing, Mr. Poe said. And what do you have to be anxious about anyway? Count Olaf, of course, Violet replied. Violet was 14, which made her the eldest Baudelaire child and the one who was the most likely to speak up to adults. She was a superb inventor, and I am certain that if she had not been so anxious, she would have tied her hair up in a ribbon to keep it out of her eyes while she thought of an invention that could brighten up her surroundings. Count Olaf, Mr. Poe said dismissively. Don't worry about him, he'll never find you here. The 3 children looked at one another and sighed. Count Olaf had been the first guardian Mr. Poe had found for the orphans, and he was a person as shady as Dark Avenue. He had one long eyebrow, a tattoo of an eye on his ankle, and 2 filthy hands that he hoped to use to snatch away the Baudelaire fortune that the orphans would soon inherit as Violet came of age. The children had convinced Mr. Poe to remove them from Olaf's care, but since then the Count had pursued them with a dogged determination. A phrase which here means everywhere they went, thinking up treacherous schemes and wearing disguises to try to fool the 3 children. It's hard not to worry about Olaf, Klaus said, taking off his glasses to see if it was easier to look around the gloom without them, because he has our compatriots in his clutches. Although Klaus, the middle Baudelaire, was only 12, he had read so many books that he frequently used words like compatriots, which is a fancy word for friends. Klaus was referring to the Quagmire triplets, whom the Baudelaires had met while they were attending boarding school. Duncan Quagmire was a reporter, and was always writing down useful information in his notebook. Isadora Quagmire was a poet, and used her notebook to write poetry. The 3rd triplet, Quigley, had died in a fire before the Baudelaire orphans had the opportunity to meet him, but the Baudelaires were certain that he would have been as good a friend as his siblings. Like the Baudelaires, the Quagmires were orphans, having lost their parents in the same fire that claimed their brother's life. And also like the Baudelaires, the Quagmires had been left an enormous fortune, in the form of the famous Quagmire sapphires, which were very rare and valuable jewels. But unlike the Baudelaires, they had not been able to escape Count Olaf's clutches. Just when the Quagmires had learned some terrible secret about Olaf, he had snatched them away. And since then, the Baudelaires had been so worried that they scarcely slept a wink. Whenever they closed their eyes, they saw only the long black car that had whisked the Quagmires away, and they heard only the sound of their friends shrieking one fragment of the dreadful secret they had learned. VFD! Duncan had screamed, just before the car raced away, and the Baudelaires tossed and turned and worried for their friends and wondered what in the world VFD could stand for. You don't have to worry about the Quagmires either, Mr. Poe said confidently. At least not for much longer. I don't know if you happen to read the Molkshuary Money Management newsletter, but I have some very good news about your friends. Gavu? Sunny asked. Sunny was the youngest Baudelaire orphan and the smallest too. She was scarcely larger than a salami. This size was usual for her age, but she had 4 teeth that were larger and sharper than those of any other baby I have ever seen. Despite the maturity of her mouth, however, Sunny usually talked in a way most people found difficult to understand. By Gavu, for instance, she meant something along the lines of, "The Quagmires have been found and rescued?" And Violet was quick to translate so Mr. Poe would understand. "Better than that," Mr. Poe said. "I have been promoted. I am now the bank's vice president in charge of orphan affairs. That means I am not in charge of not only your situation, but of the Quagmire situation as well. I promise you that I will concentrate a great deal of my energy on finding the Quagmires and returning them to safety, or my name isn't—" Here Mr. Poe interrupted himself to cough once more into his handkerchief, and the Baudelaires waited patiently until he finished. "Poe. Now, as soon as I drop you off here, I am taking a 3-week helicopter ride to a mountain peak where the Quagmires may have been spotted. It will be very difficult to reach me during that time as the helicopter has no phone, but I will call you as soon as I get back with your young pals. Now, can you see the number on this building? It's hard for me to tell if we're at the right place." "I think it says 667, Klaus said, squinting in the dim green light. "Then we're here," Mr. Poe said. "Mr. and Mrs. Squalor live in the penthouse apartment of 667 Dark Avenue. I think the door is here?" "No, it's over here," said a high, scratchy voice out of the darkness. The Baudelaires jumped a little in surprise and turned to see a man wearing a hat with a wide brim and a coat that was much too big for him. The coat sleeves hung over his hands, covering them completely, and the brim of his hat covered most of his face. He was so difficult to see that it was no wonder that the children hadn't spotted him earlier. "Most of our visitors find it hard to spot the door," the man said. "That's why they hired a doorman." "Well, I'm glad they did," Mr. Poe said. "My name is Poe, and I have an appointment with Mr. and Mrs. Squalor to drop off their new children." "Oh, yes," the doorman said. "They told me you were coming. Come on in." The doorman opened the door of the building and showed them inside to a room that was as dark as the street. Instead of lights, there were only a few candles placed on the floor, and the children could scarcely tell whether it was a large room or a small room that they were standing in. My, it's dark in here," Mr. Poe said. "Why don't you ask your employers to help bring in a good, strong halogen lamp?" "We can't," the doorman replied. "Right now, dark is in." "In what?" Violet asked. "Just in," the doorman explained. "Around here, people decide whether something is in, which means it's stylish and appealing, or out, which means it's not. And it changes all the time. Why, just a couple of weeks ago, dark was out and light was in, and you should have seen this neighborhood. You had to wear sunglasses all the time or you'd hurt your eyes." "Dark is in, huh?" Mr. Poe said. "Wait until I tell my wife. In the meantime, could you show us where the elevator is? Mr. and Mrs. Squalor live in the penthouse apartment, and I don't want to walk all the way to the top floor." "Well, I'm afraid you'll have to," the doorman said. "There's a pair of elevator doors right over there, but they won't be of any use to you." "Is the elevator out of order?" Violet asked. "I'm very good with mechanical devices, and I'd be happy to take a look at it." "That's a very kind and unusual offer," the doorman said. "But the elevator isn't out of order. It's just out. The neighborhood decided that elevators were out, so they had the elevator shut down. Stairs are in, though, so there's still a way to get to the penthouse. Let me show you." The doorman led the way across the lobby, and the Baudelaire orphans peered up at a very long, curved staircase made of wood, with a metal banister that curved alongside. Every few steps they could see, somebody had placed more candles, so the staircase looked like nothing more than curves of flickering lights, growing dimmer as the staircase went farther and farther up until they could see nothing at all. "I've never seen anything like this," Klaus said. "It looks more like a cave than a staircase," Violet said. "Pince," Sunny said, which meant something like, or outer space. "It looks like a long walk to me," Mr. Poe said, frowning. He turned to the doorman. "How many floors up does this staircase go?" The doorman's shoulders shrugged underneath his oversized coat. "I can't remember," he said. "I think it's 48, but it might be 84. "I didn't know buildings could be that high." "Well, whether it's 48 or 84, Mr. Poe said, I don't have time to walk you children all the way up. I'll miss my helicopter. You'll have to go up by yourselves and tell Mr. and Mrs. Squalor I send my regards." We have to walk up by ourselves? Violet said. Just be glad you don't have any of your things with you, Mr. Poe said. Mrs. Squalor said there was no reason to bring any of your old clothing, and I think it's because she wanted to save you the effort of dragging those suitcases all the way up those stairs. You're not going to come with us? Klaus asked. I simply don't have the time to accompany you, Mr. Poe said, and that is that. The Baudelaires looked at one another. The children knew, as I'm sure you know, that there is usually no reason to be afraid of the dark, but even if you are not particularly afraid of something, you might not want to get near it, and the orphans were a bit nervous about climbing all the way up to the penthouse without an adult walking beside them. If you're afraid of the dark, Mr. Poe said, I suppose I could delay my search for the Quagmires and take you to your new guardians. No, Klaus said quickly. We're not afraid of the dark, and finding the Quagmires is much more important. Oh, Bog, Sunny said doubtfully. Just try to crawl as long as you can, Violet said to her sister, and then Klaus and I will take turns carrying you. Goodbye, Mr. Poe. Goodbye, children, Mr. Poe said. If there's any problem, remember you can always contact me or any of my associates at Mortuary Money Management, at least as soon as I get off the helicopter. There's one good thing about this staircase, the doorman joked, starting to walk Mr. Poe back to the front door. It's all uphill from here. The Baudelaire orphans listened to the doorman's chuckles as he disappeared into the darkness, and they walked up the first few steps. As I'm sure you know, the expression "it's all uphill from here" has nothing to do with walking upstairs. It merely means that things will get better in the future. The children had understood the joke, but they were too anxious to laugh. They were anxious about Count Olaf, who might find them any minute. They were anxious about the Quagmire triplets, whom they might never see again, and now as they began to walk up the candlelit stairway, they were anxious about their new guardians. They tried to imagine what sort of people would live on such a dark street in such a dark building and at the top of either 48 or 84 flights of very dark stairs. They found it difficult to believe that things would get better in the future when they lived in such gloomy and poorly lit surroundings. Even though a long upward climb awaited them, as the Baudelaire orphans started walking into the darkness, they were too anxious to believe it was all uphill from here. That's end of chapter 1. I think I have a lot to catch up on. Just what it'll do after, yeah. Olaf is the bad guy. Hi, Cabbage. Oh, thank you so much for the host, Summer. Cabbage, I'm really glad to hear that you're 9 months alcohol-free. Oh, thank you so much for the host, Rob. Good morning to you guys. Hello, Moocher. Book while driving home. I'm glad you get to hear it. Darkness is in, yo. Oh, well, you're stuck in traffic? Well, be careful. Don't be texting and driving. Good morning, Corinne. Great to see you. Thank you for shouting out my friends. Bad morning, Goofy. It's up to you as CT to solve that mystery, Kareen. So confused. You're anxious too? Sames, though. What is the crisscross? I don't understand the crisscross. Yeah, this is book number 6, Josh, so you've missed the first 5. If you'd like to hear me read them, they are archived on my YouTube channel, which is linked in my Twitch info, but it'd be a time investment. Aw, thank you, Corinne. We know Moocher is a Sith. I didn't want to type out her name in case she doesn't want all to know it. What? Okay, I think I'm caught up. You're confusing me a lot this morning, Rob, sorry. Okay, I'm trying to understand. Crisscross applesauce and applesauce is applause. Okay, I understand. Thank you for explaining. I just put on a relaxing Nintendo music compilation. I'm easily confused in the mornings. I'm sorry. Okay, moving on. Chapter 2. I drank some polar water and then I had to burp. My apologies. Chapter 2. In order to get a better sense of exactly how the Baudelaire orphans felt as they began the grueling journey up the stairs... Thank you. Up the stairs to Mr. and Mrs. Squaller's penthouse apartment, you might find it useful to close your eyes as you read this chapter because the light was so dim from the small candles on the ground that it felt as if their eyes were closed even when they were looking as hard as they could. At each curve in the staircase there was a door... Hang on. Okay. At each curve in the staircase, there was a door that led to the apartment on each floor, and a pair of sliding elevator doors. From behind the sliding doors, the youngsters of course heard nothing, as the elevator had been shut down, but behind the doors to the apartments, the children could hear the noises of people who lived in the building. When they reached the 7th floor, they heard 2 men laugh as somebody told a joke. When they reached the 12th floor, they heard the splashing of water as somebody took a bath. When they reached the 19th floor, they heard a woman say, "Let them eat cake," in a voice with a strange accent. I wonder what people will hear when they walk by the penthouse apartment, Violet wondered out loud, when we are living there. I hope they hear me turning pages, Klaus said. Maybe Mr. and Mrs. Squaller will have some interesting books to read. Or maybe people will hear me using a wrench, Violet said. I hope the Squallers have some tools they'd let me use for my inventing. Crife, Sunny said, crawling carefully past one of the candles on the ground. Violet looked down at her and smiled. I don't think that will be a problem, Sunny, she said. You usually find something or other to bite. Be sure to speak up when you want us to start carrying you. I wish somebody would carry me, Klaus said, clutching the banister for support. I'm starting to get tired. Me too, Violet admitted. You would think after Count Olaf made us run all those laps when he was disguised as a gym teacher that these stairs wouldn't tire us out, but that's not the case. What floor are we on anyway? I don't know, Klaus said. The doors aren't numbered and I've lost count. Well, we won't miss the penthouse, Violet said. It's on the top floor, so we'll just keep walking until the stairs stop. I wish you could invent a device that would take us up the stairs, Klaus said. Violet smiled, although her siblings couldn't see it in the darkness. That device was invented a long time ago, she said. It's called an elevator, but elevators are out, remember? Klaus smiled too. And tired feet are in, he said. Remember that time, Violet said, when our parents attended the 16th annual run-a-thon and their feet were so tired when they got home that Dad prepared dinner while sitting on the kitchen floor instead of standing? Of course I remember, Klaus said. We had only salad because they couldn't stand up to reach the stove. It would have been a perfect meal for Aunt Josephine, Violet said, remembering one of the Baudelaire's previous guardians. She never wanted to use the stove because she thought it might explode. Pomerays, Sunny said sadly. She meant something along the lines of, as it turned out, the stove was the least of Aunt Josephine's problems. That's true, Violet said quietly, as the children heard someone sneeze from behind a door. I wonder what the Squallers will be like, Klaus said. Well, they must be wealthy to live on Dark Avenue, Violet said. Acrophil, Sunny said, which meant, and they're not afraid of heights, that's for sure. Klaus smiled and looked down at his sister. You sound tired, Sunny, he said. Violet and I can take turns carrying you. We'll switch every 3 floors. Violet nodded in agreement with Klaus's plan and then said yes out loud because she realized that her nod was invisible in the gloom. They continued up the staircase, and I'm sorry to say that the 2 older Baudelaires took many, many turns holding Sunny. If the Baudelaires had been going up a staircase of regular size, I would write the sentence up and up they went, but a more appropriate sentence would begin up and up and up and up, and would take either 48 or 84 pages to reach they went, because the staircase was so unbelievably lengthy. Occasionally they would pass the shadowy figure of someone else walking down the stairs, but the children were too tired to say even good afternoon and later good evening to these other residents of 667 Dark Avenue. The Baudelaires grew hungry, they grew achy, and they grew very tired of gazing at identical candles and steps and doors. Just when they could stand it no longer, they reached another candle and step and door, and about 5 flights after that, the stairs finally ended and deposited the tired children in a small room with one last candle sitting in the middle of the carpet. By the light of the candle, the Baudelaire orphans could see the door to their new home, and across the way 2 pairs of sliding elevator doors with arrowed buttons alongside. "Just think," Violet said, panting from her long walk up the stairs. "If elevators were in, we would have arrived at the Squalor penthouse in just a few minutes." "Well, maybe they'll be back in soon," Klaus said. "I hope so. The other door must be to the Squalor's apartment. Let's knock." They knocked on the door, and almost instantly it swung open to reveal a tall man wearing a suit with long, narrow stripes down it. Such a suit is called a pinstripe suit and is usually worn by people who are either movie stars or gangsters. "I thought I heard someone approaching the door," the man said, giving the children a smile that was so big they could see it even in the dim room. "Please, come in. My name is Jerome Squalor, and I'm so happy that you've come to stay with us." "I'm very pleased to meet you, Mr. Squalor," Violet said, still panting, as she and her siblings walked into an entryway almost as dim as the staircase. "I'm Violet Baudelaire, and this is my brother, Klaus, and my sister, Sunny." "Goodness, you sound out of breath," Mr. Squalor said. "Luckily, I can think of 2 things to do about that. One is that you can stop calling me Mr. Squalor and start calling me Jerome. I'll call you 3 by your first names, too, and that way we'll all save breath. The second thing is that I will make you a nice cold martini. Come right this way." "A martini?" Klaus asked. "Isn't that an alcoholic beverage?" "Usually it is," Jerome agreed, "but right now alcoholic martinis are out. Aqueous martinis are in. An aqueous martini is simply cold water served in a fancy glass with an olive in it, so it's perfectly legal for children as well as for adults." "I've never had an aqueous martini," Violet said, "but I'll try one." "Ah," Jerome said, "you're adventurous. I like that in a person. Your mother was adventurous, too. You know, she and I were very good friends a way back. We hiked up Mount Fraught with some friends. Gosh, it must have been 20 years ago. Mount Fraught was known for having dangerous animals on it, but your mother wasn't afraid. But then, swooping out of the sky—" "Jerome, who was that at the door?" called a voice from the next room, and in walked a tall, slender woman, also dressed in a pinstripe suit. She had long fingernails that were so strongly polished that they shone even in the dim light. "The Baudelaire children, of course," Jerome replied. "But they're not coming today," the woman cried. "Of course they are," Jerome said. "I've been looking forward to it for days and days. You know," he said, turning from the woman to the Baudelaires, "I wanted to adopt you from the moment I heard about the fire, but unfortunately it was impossible." "Orphans were out then," the woman explained. "Now they're in." "My wife is always very attentive to what's in and what's out," Jerome said. "I don't care about it much, but Esme feels differently. She was the one who insisted on having the elevator removed. Esme, I was just about to make them some aqueous martinis. Would you like one?" "Oh, yes," Esme cried. "Aqueous martinis are in." She walked quickly over to the children and looked them over. "I'm Esme Gigi Genevieve Squalor, the city's 6th most important financial advisor," she announced grandly. "Even though I am unbelievably wealthy, you may call me Esme. I'll learn your names later. I'm very happy you're here, because orphans are in, and when all my friends hear that I have 3 real, live orphans, they'll be sick with jealousy, won't they, Jerome?" "I hope not," Jerome said, leading the children down a long, dim hallway to a huge, dim room that had various fancy couches, chairs, and tables. At the far end of the room was a series of windows, all with their shades drawn so that no light could get in. "I don't like to hear of anybody getting sick. Well, have a seat, children, and we'll tell you a little bit about your new home." The Baudelaires sat down in 3 huge chairs, grateful for the opportunity to rest their feet. Jerome crossed to one of the tables where a pitcher of water sat next to a bowl of olives and some fancy glasses, and quickly prepared the aqueous martinis. "Here you go," he said, handing Esme and the children each a fancy glass. Let's see, in case you ever get lost, remember that your new address is 667 Dark Avenue in the penthouse apartment." "Oh, don't tell them silly things like that," Esme said, waving her long-nailed hand in front of her face as if a moth were attacking it. "Children, here are some things you should know. Dark is in, light is out, stairs are in, elevators are out, pinstripe suits are in, those horrible clothes you are wearing are out." What Esme means, Jerome said quickly, is that we want you to feel as comfortable here as possible. Violet took a sip of her aqueous martini. She was not surprised to find that it tasted like plain water with a slight hint of olive. She didn't like it much, but it did quench her thirst from the long climb up the stairs. "That's very nice of you," she said. "Mr. Poe told me about some of your previous guardians," Jerome said, shaking his head. "I feel awful that you've had such terrible experiences and that we could have cared for you the entire time." "It couldn't be helped," Esme said. "When something is out, it's out, and orphans used to be out." "I heard all about this Count Olaf person, too," Jerome said. "I told the doorman not to let anyone in the building who looked even vaguely like that despicable man, so you should be safe." "That's a relief," Klaus said. "That dreadful man is supposed to be up on some mountain anyway," Esme said. "Remember, Jerome? That unstylish banker said he was going away in a helicopter to go find those twins he kidnapped." "Actually," Violet said, "they're triplets. The Quagmires are good friends of ours." "My word," Jerome said, "you must be worried sick." "Well, if they find them soon," Esme said, "we'll adopt them too. 5 orphans! I'll be the innest person in town." "We certainly have room for them," Jerome said. "This is a 71-bedroom apartment, children, so you will have your pick of rooms." "Klaus, Poe mentioned something about your being interested in inventing things. Is that right?" "My sister is the inventor," Klaus replied. "I'm more of a researcher myself." "Well, then," Jerome said, "you can have the bedroom next to the library, and Violet can have the one that has a large wooden bench perfect for keeping tools. Sunny can be in the room between you two. How does that sound?" That sounded absolutely splendid, of course, but the Baudelaire orphans did not get an opportunity to say so, because a telephone rang just at that instant. I'll get it, Esme cried and raced across the room to pick up the phone. "Squalor residence," she said into the receiver, and then waited as the person spoke on the other end. "Yes, this is Mrs. Squalor." "Yes? Yes? Yes? Oh, thank you. She hung up the phone and turned to the children. "Guess what?" she said. "I have some fantastic news on what we were talking about." "The Quagmires have been found?" Klaus asked hopefully. "Who?" Esme asked. "Oh, them. No, they haven't been found. Don't be silly. Jerome, children, listen to me. Dark is out. Regular light is in." "Well, I'm not sure I'd call that fantastic news," Jerome said, "but it will be a relief to get some light around this place. Come on, Baudelaires, help me open the shades and you can get a look at our view. You can see quite a bit from so high up." "I'll go turn on all the lamps in the penthouse," Esme said breathlessly. "Quickly, before anyone sees that this apartment is still dark." Esme dashed from the room while Jerome gave the 3 siblings a little shrug and walked across the room to the windows. The Baudelaires followed him and helped him open the heavy shades that were covering the windows. Instantly, sunlight streamed into the room, making them squint as their eyes adjusted to regular light. If the Baudelaires had looked around the room now that it was properly illuminated, they would have seen just how fancy all the furniture was. The couches had pillows embroidered with silver, the chairs were all painted with gold paint, and the tables were made from wood chopped away from some of the most expensive trees in the world. But the Baudelaire orphans were not looking around the room as luxurious as it was. They were looking out of the window onto the city below. "Spectacular view, don't you think?" Jerome asked them, and they nodded in agreement. It was as if they were looking out on a tiny, tiny city, with matchboxes instead of buildings and bookmarks instead of streets. They could see tiny colored shapes that looked like various insects, but were all really the cars and carriages in town, driving along the bookmarks until they reached the matchboxes where the tiny dots of people lived and worked. The Baudelaires could see the neighborhood where they had lived with their parents, and the parts of town where their friends had lived, and in a faint blue strip far, far away, the beach where they had received the terrible news that had begun all their misfortune. "I knew you'd like it," Jerome said. "It's very expensive to live in a penthouse apartment, but I think it's worth it for a view like this. Look, those tiny round boxes over there are orange juice factories. That sort of purplish building next to the pink is my favorite restaurant. Oh, and look straight down. They're already cutting down those awful trees that made our street so dark." "Of course they're cutting them down," Esme said, hurrying back into the room and blowing out a few candles that were sitting on the mantelpiece. "Regular light is in as aqueous martinis, pinstripes, and orphans." Violet, Klaus, and Sunny looked straight down and saw that Jerome was right. Those strange trees that had blocked out the sunlight on Dark Avenue, looking no taller than paper clips from such a great height, were being chopped down by little gardener dots. Even though the trees had made the street seem so gloomy, it had seemed a shame to tear them all down, leaving bare stumps that from the penthouse window looked like thumbtacks. The 3 siblings looked at one another and then back down to Dark Avenue. Those trees were no longer in, so the gardeners were getting rid of them. The Baudelaires did not like to think of what would happen when orphans were no longer in either. It's end of chapter 2. Yeah, thank you so much for the follow, Corinne. Yeah, I hope work was good for you, Moocher. Cake sniffing orphans in the orphan shack. My face is everywhere. I'm not a star. Thank you, though. Are they gangsters? What if fresh air is out? Your flattery won't stop me from watching. Are you not the innest person in town? The major plot twist is that Jerome is Olaf's clone. Just buckle up, Josh. Morning, Paige. I'm trying to catch up, I'm sorry. Yeah. I got some PBW. And it's lime flavor, which is why the green is acting goofy. If you read this down here, I catch up on the chat between chapters. Okay. Most of that was not directed to me, so that's fine. Okay. Chapter 3. If you were to take a plastic bag and place it inside a large bowl, and then using a wooden spoon, stir the bag around and around the bowl, you could use the expression a mixed bag to describe what you had in front of you, but you would not be using the expression in the same way I am about to use it right now. Although a mixed bag sometimes refers to a plastic bag that has been stirred in a bowl, more often it is used to describe a situation that has both good parts and bad parts. An afternoon at a movie theater, for instance, would be a mixed bag if your favorite movie were showing, but you had to eat gravel instead of popcorn. A trip to the zoo would be a very mixed bag if the weather were beautiful, but all the man and woman-eating lions were running around loose. And for the Baudelaire orphans, their first few days with the Squallers were one of the most mixed bags they had yet encountered, because the good parts were very good, but the bad parts were simply awful. One of the good parts was that the Baudelaires were living once more in the city where they were born and raised. After the Baudelaire parents had died and after their disastrous stay with Count Olaf, the three children had been sent to a number of remote locations to live, and they sorely missed their familiar surroundings of their hometown. Each morning after Esme left for work, Jerome would take the children to some of their favorite places in town. Violet was happy to see that her favorite exhibits at the Verne Invention Museum had not been changed so she could take another look at the mechanical demonstrations that had inspired her to be an inventor when she was just 2 years old. Klaus was delighted to revisit the Akhmatova bookstore where his father used to take him as a special treat to buy an atlas or a volume of the encyclopedia. And Sunny was interested in visiting the Pincus Hospital where she was born, although her memories of this place were a little fuzzy. But in the afternoons, the three children would return to 667 Dark Avenue, and it was this part of the Baudelaire situation that was not nearly as pleasant. For one thing, the penthouse was simply too big. Besides the 71 bedrooms, there were a number of living rooms, dining rooms, breakfast rooms, snack rooms, sitting rooms, standing rooms, ballrooms, bathrooms, kitchens, and an assortment of rooms that seemed to have no purpose at all. The penthouse was so enormous that the Baudelaire orphans often found themselves hopelessly lost inside it. Violet would leave her bedroom to go brush her teeth and not find her way back for an hour. Klaus would accidentally leave his glasses on a kitchen counter and waste the whole afternoon trying to find the right kitchen. And Sunny would find a very comfortable spot for sitting and biting things and be unable to find it the next day. It was often difficult to spend any time with Jerome simply because it was very difficult to find him amid all the fancy rooms of their new home, and the Baudelaires scarcely saw Esme at all. They knew she went off to work every day and returned in the evenings, but even at the times when she was in the apartment with them, the three children scarcely caught a glimpse of the city's sixth most important financial advisor. It was as if she had forgotten all about the new members of her family, or was simply more interested in lounging around the rooms in the apartment rather than spending time with the three siblings. But the Baudelaire orphans did not really mind that Esme was absent so often. They much preferred spending time with one another or with Jerome, rather than participating in endless conversations about what was in and what was out. Even when the Baudelaires stayed in their bedrooms, the three children did not have such a splendid time. As he had promised, Jerome had given Violet the bedroom with the large wooden bench, which was indeed perfect for keeping tools, but Violet could find no tools in the entire penthouse. She found it odd that such an enormous apartment would not even have a socket wrench or one measly pair of pliers, but Esme haughtily explained, when Violet asked her one evening, that tools were out. Klaus did have the squalor library next to his bedroom, and it was a large and comfortable room with hundreds of books on its shelves, but the middle Baudelaire was disappointed to find that every single book was merely a description of what had been in and out during various times in history. Klaus tried to interest himself in books of this type, but it was so dull to read a snooty book like Boots Were In 1812, or Trout, In France They're Out, that Klaus found himself spending scarcely any time in the library at all. And poor Sunny fared no better, a phrase which here means also became bored in her bedroom. Jerome had thoughtfully placed a number of toys in her room, but they were the sort of toys designed for softer-toothed babies. Squishy stuffed animals, cushioned balls, and assorted colorful pillows, none of which were the least bit fun to bite. But what really mixed the Baudelaire bag was not the overwhelming size of the squalor apartment, or the disappointments of a tool bench without tools, or a library without interesting books or non-chewable items of amusement. What really troubled the three children was the thought that the Quagmire triplets were undoubtedly experiencing things that were much, much worse. With every passing day, their worry for their friends felt like a heavy load on the Baudelaire's shoulders, and the load only seemed heavier because the Squallers refused to be of any assistance. "I'm very, very tired of discussing your little twin friends," Esme said one day as the Baudelaires and the Squallers sipped aqueous martinis one evening in a living room the children had never seen before. "I know you're worried about them, but it's boring to keep blabbing on about it." "We didn't mean to bore you," Violet said, not adding that it's terribly rude to tell people that their troubles are boring. "Of course you didn't," Jerome said, picking his olive out of his fancy glass and popping it into his mouth before returning to his wife. "The children are concerned, Esme, which is perfectly understandable. I know Mr. Poe is doing all he can, but maybe we could put our heads together and come up with something else." "I don't have time to put my head together," Esme said. "The inn auction is coming up, and I have to devote all of my energy to making sure it's a success." "The inn auction?" Klaus asked. "An auction," Jerome explained, "is a sort of sale. Everyone gets together in a large room, and an auctioneer shows off a bunch of things that are available for purchase. If you see something you like, you call out how much you'd be willing to pay for it. That's called a bid. Then somebody else might call a bid, and somebody else, and whoever calls out the highest price wins the auction and buys the item in question. It's terribly exciting. Your mother used to love them. I remember one time— You forgot the most important part, Esme interrupted. It's called the in auction because we're selling only things that are in. I always organize it, and it's one of the most smashing events of the year. Smashy? Sonny asked. In this case, Klaus explained to his younger sister, the word smashing doesn't mean that things get smashed up, it just means fabulous. And it is fabulous, Esme said, finishing her aqueous martini. We hold the auction at Veblen Hall, and we auction off only the innest things we can find, and best of all the money goes to a good cause. What good cause? Violet asked. Esme clapped her long-nailed hands together with glee. Me! Every bit of money that people pay at the auction goes right to me. Isn't that smashing? Actually, dear, Jerome said, I was thinking that this year perhaps we should give the money to another good cause. For instance, I was just reading about this family of 7. The mother and father lost their jobs, and now they're so poor they can't even afford to live in a one-room apartment. We might send them some of the auction money to people like them. Don't talk nonsense, Esme said crossly. If we give money to poor people, then they won't be poor anymore. Besides, this year we're going to make heaps of money. I had lunch with 12 millionaires this morning, and 11 of them said they were definitely going to attend the in-auction. The 12th one just has to go to a birthday party. Just think of the money I'll make, Jerome. Maybe we could move to a bigger apartment. But we just moved in here a few weeks ago, Jerome said. I'd rather spend some money on putting the elevator back in use. It's very tiring to climb up all the way to this penthouse. There you go, talking nonsense again, Esme said. If I'm not listening to my orphans babble about their kidnapped friends, I'm listening to you talk about out things like elevators. Well, we have no more time for chit-chat in any case. Gunther is stopping by tonight, and I want you, Jerome, to take the children out for dinner. Who's Gunther? Jerome asked. Gunther is the auctioneer, of course, Esme replied. He's supposed to be the innest auctioneer in town, and he's coming to help me organize the auction. He's coming over tonight to discuss the auction catalog, and we don't want to be disturbed. That's why I want you to go out to dinner and give us a little privacy. But I was going to teach the children how to play chess tonight, Jerome said. No, Esme said. You're going out to dinner. It's all arranged. I made a reservation at Cafe Salmonella for 7 o'clock. It's 6 o'clock now, so you should get moving. You want to allow plenty of time to walk down all those stairs. But before you leave, children, I have a present for each of you. At this, the Baudelaire children were taken aback, a phrase which here means surprised that someone who was so selfish had purchased gifts for them. But sure enough, Esme reached behind the dark red sofa she was sitting on and brought out 3 shopping bags that had the words "In Boutique" written on them in fancy curly script. With an elegant gesture, Esme handed a bag to each Baudelaire. I thought if I brought you something you really wanted, she said, you might stop all this chatter about the Quagmires. What Esme means, Jerome added hurriedly, is that we want you to be happy here in our home, even when you're worried about your friends. But that's not what I mean at all, Esme said, but never mind. Open the bags, kids. The Baudelaire orphans opened their presents, and I'm sorry to say that the shopping bags were mixed bags as well. There are many, many things that are difficult in this life, but one thing that isn't difficult at all is figuring out whether someone is excited or not when they open a present. If someone is excited, they will often put exclamation points at the end of their sentences to indicate the excited tone of their voice. If they say, "Oh!" for instance, the exclamation point would indicate that the person is saying "oh" in an excited way, rather than simply saying "oh" with a comma after it, which would indicate that the present is somewhat disappointing. "Oh," Violet said as she opened her present. "Oh," Klaus said as he opened his. "Oh," Sunny said as she tore open her shopping bag with her teeth. Pinstripe suits. I knew you'd be excited, Esme said. You must have been mortified the last few days walking around the city without wearing any pinstripes. Pinstripes are in, and orphans are in. So just imagine how in you'll be when you are orphans wearing pinstripes. No wonder you're so excited. They didn't sound excited when they opened the presents, Jerome said, and I don't blame them. Esme, I thought we said we'd buy Violet a toolkit. She's very enthusiastic about inventing, and I thought we'd support that enthusiasm. But I'm enthusiastic about pinstripe suits, too, Violet said, knowing that you should always say that you're delighted with a present even when you don't really like it at all. Thank you so much. And Klaus was supposed to get a good almanac, Jerome continued. I told you about his interest in the International Dateline, and an almanac is the perfect book to learn all about that. Oh, but I'm very interested in pinstripes, said Klaus, who could lie as well as his sister when the need arose. I really appreciate this gift. And Sunny, Jerome said, was going to be given a large square made of bronze. It would have been attractive and easily biteable. Jim, Sunny said. She meant something along the lines of, I love my suit, thank you very much, even though she didn't mean that one bit. I know we discussed buying those silly items, Esme said with a wave of her long-nailed hand, but tools have been out for weeks, almanacs have been out for months, and I received a phone call this afternoon informing me that large bronze squares are not expected to be in for at least another year. What's in now is pinstripes, Jerome, and I don't appreciate your trying to teach my new children that they should ignore what's in and what's out. Don't you want what's best for the orphans? Of course, Jerome sighed. I hadn't thought of it that way, Esme. Well, children, I do hope you like your gifts, even though they don't exactly match up with your interests. Why don't we go change into your new suits, and we'll wear them out to dinner? Oh, yes, Esme said. Cafe Salmonella is one of the innest restaurants. In fact, I think they don't even let you eat there if you're not wearing pinstripes, so go change. But hurry, Gunther is due to arrive any minute. We'll hurry, Klaus promised, and thank you again for our gift. You're very welcome, Jerome said with a smile, and the children smiled back at him, walked out of the living room, down a long hallway, across a kitchen, through another living room, past 4 bathrooms, and so on and so on and so on, eventually finding their way to their bedrooms. They stood together for a minute outside the 3 bedroom doors, looking sadly into their shopping bags. I don't know how we're going to wear these things, Violet said. I don't either, Klaus said, and it's all the worse knowing that we almost got presents we really want. Pew too, Sunny agreed glumly. Listen to us, Violet said. We sound hopelessly spoiled. We're living in an enormous apartment. We each have our own room. The doorman has promised to watch out for Count Olaf, and at least one of our new guardians is an interesting person, and yet we're standing here complaining. You're right, Klaus said. We should make the best of things. Getting a lousy present isn't really worth complaining over, not when our friends are in such terrible danger. We're really very lucky to be here at all. Chittle, Sunny said, which meant something like, that's true. We should stop complaining and go change into our new outfits. The Baudelaires stood together for another moment and nodded resolutely, a phrase which here means tried to make themselves stop feeling ungrateful and put on the suits. But even though they didn't want to seem spoiled, even though they knew their situation was not a terrible one at all, and even though they had less than an hour to change into suits, find Jerome, and walk down all those hundreds and hundreds of stairs, the 3 children could not seem to move. They simply stood in front of their bedroom doors and stared into their bags from the inn boutique. Of course, Klaus said finally, no matter how lucky we are, the fact remains that these pinstripe suits are entirely too big for us. Klaus spoke the truth. It was a truth that might help you understand why the Baudelaires were so disappointed with what was in their bags. It was a truth that might help you understand why the Baudelaires were so reluctant to go into their rooms and change into their pinstripe suits. And it was a truth that became even more obvious when the Baudelaires finally went into their rooms and opened their bags and put on the gifts that Esme had given them. It is often difficult to tell if a piece of clothing will fit you or not until you try it on, but the Baudelaire children could tell the instant they first looked into these shopping bags that these clothes dwarfed them by comparison. The expression dwarfed by comparison has nothing to do with dwarves, who are dull creatures in fairy tales who spend their times whistling and cleaning house. Dwarfed by comparison simply means that one thing seems small when compared to another thing. A mouse would be dwarfed by comparison with an ostrich, which is much bigger, and an ostrich would be dwarfed by comparison with the city of Paris. And the Baudelaires were dwarfed by comparison with the pinstripe suits. When Violet put the pants part of her suit on, the legs of the suit stretched much, much farther than the legs of her body, so it was as if she had 2 huge noodles instead of feet. When Klaus put the jacket part of his suit on, the sleeves fell far, far past his hands, so his arms looked as if they had shrunk up inside his body. And Sunny's suit dwarfed her so much by comparison that it was as if she had pulled the covers over her in bed instead of changing her clothes. When the Baudelaires stepped back out of their bedrooms and met up again in the hallway, they were so dwarfed by comparison that they scarcely recognized one another. You look like you're skiing, Klaus said, pointing at his older sister's pant legs. Except your skis are made of cloth instead of titanium alloy. You look like you remembered to put on your jacket but forgot to put on your arms, Violet replied with a grin. Run! Sunny shrieked, and even her 2 siblings couldn't understand what she was saying from beneath all that pinstriped cloth. Goodness, Sunny, Violet said, I thought you were a lump in the carpet. Here, we better just tie one of the sleeves of the suit around you. Maybe tomorrow we could find a pair of scissors and... No, Sunny interrupted. Don't be silly, Sunny, Klaus said. We've seen you in your underwear hundreds of times. One more time won't matter. But Klaus was wrong. He wasn't wrong about the underwear. If you're a baby, your family will see you in your underwear many times. There's no use to be embarrassed about it. But he was wrong in thinking that by saying, Sunny had been complaining about getting undressed in front of her siblings. Sunny's oversized suit had muffled the word she was really saying, and it is a word that still haunts me in my dreams, and I toss and I turn each night. Images of Beatrice and her legacy filling my weary, grieving brain no matter where in the world I travel, and no matter what important evidence I discover. It is necessary once more to use the expression dwarfed in comparison in order to refer to what happened after Sunny said that fatal word out loud. For even though Violet and Klaus could not hear what Sunny had said, they learned instantly what their sister had meant. For as Sunny uttered the word, a long shadow was cast over the Baudelaires, and they looked up to see what was blocking the light. And when they looked, they felt everything about their lives become dwarfed in comparison to how trapped they felt, because this word, I'm sorry to say, was Olaf. Alright, that's end of chapter 3. Let me catch up, and then I'll probably be wrapping up there. Two Lefts Don't Make a Right, but Three Do is one of Reliant K's albums. Oh, ow. I swallowed that way too fast. My chest hurt. Oh my gosh. Hi, Timo. How are you? Thank you for the bit. Oh, it's okay, Rob. I didn't even see your thing until I said it. Randomly sung. That sounds accurate. Summer. Oh, oh, oh. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for those bits, Shannon! Thank you so much. And my khaki pants. Hi, Carly. Good morning. This series does have terrible adults. That's kind of like the point of this series. My Siri thought I was talking to her. Yeah, but what if their troubles are boring? We're the spawn of Satan in a small child body. Oh no. Oh my word, Carly. No wonder they're so rich. Ouch. Sorry about coffee burn. They won't be poor anymore. I don't like you. You are terrible. That was Esme Squalor. Wow, Carly. I mean, is what I would do that, kid. No, just kidding. You can't do that in 2018. I'm sorry about that. Hello, Heartless Shroom. Please no spoiling, Heartless Shroom. I'm just scrolling because I'm trying to find anything that I should be addressing. I don't want to be like interrupting conversations between you guys, so. I may be stopping here actually, Tara, but thank you so much for that. I just have so much I have to get done. Oh gosh, Manny. Oh, it's okay, Josh, and I'm glad you laughed, Rob. That is a cliffhanger. You think I haven't seen the show? Every new male character is Olaf. Not always! Not always. I mean, we got Jerome. Okay. Alright, guys. I'm really sorry that I have to make this into a shorter stream. I just have a lot I have to get done today. I have a lot of chores, and I got called in early to work today. Kill me. So I have to be handling that. Thank you guys for hanging out. So we got 3 chapters done, which means I was going to try to get 4 or 5 done, but these first chapters were a bit longer than I anticipated. So I did 3 chapters, so the next section I will do 5, and then we'll do 5 again for the 3rd section. I'm really sorry about that. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for hanging out. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll be back with this as soon as I can. Tomorrow I plan to be doing Wind Waker Wednesday with Holland after I get off work tomorrow afternoon. So that will be what's going on. And then I will stream again on Saturday afternoon into evening is my plan. Thank you guys again for being here. Sorry I can't stay longer. Have a wonderful rest of the day. As always, take care of yourselves. Much love from me to you, and I'll catch you all soon. I'll leave you with a little bit of music. Bye!